My guest this week is an award-winning writer and podcaster who's made a success out of a failure. Elizabeth Day is an award-winning journalist and author who shot to fame with her best-selling novel, The Party. She's since gone on to launch the hit podcast How to Fail, which has had a massive 13 million downloads and seen her get personal with everyone from Phoebe Waller-Bridge to Lily Allen, who have joined her to reveal their biggest failures. And now she's going even deeper with her new book, Failosophy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elizabeth Day! Normally what happens, we kind of like touch elbows, but we're not even allowed to do that now. We have to stay 2 meters apart.
I'm okay with that. I mean, clearly you wanted to touch me, but...
Yeah, that did come across as weird. Like,
creep.
I'm not allowed to touch people anymore. So you've got a brilliant podcast all about failure. What is so important about failing, do you think?
Well, I think we all fail. That's the first thing to say. So it's actually quite a democratising thing when you realise that. But even though we all fail and we all make mistakes, so many of us feel fearful of it. And my whole point is we shouldn't feel fearful of something that's inevitably going to happen at some point in our life. And that actually, unless we make a mistake, we can't learn the lessons that we need to learn. So making mistakes and making failures actually makes you stronger, more resilient, and more able to succeed in the future. That's the premise of it anyway.
And basically you sort of chat with kind of celebrities and fascinating people.
Exactly. So I asked them in advance of the podcast interview to come up with 3 failures.
Yeah.
And it can be anything. It can be from the relatively trivial, like a failed driving test, to something much more profound, like a failed relationship, or we've had people talking about miscarriage or suicide attempts. And so it really runs the whole gamut. And what's been really beautiful about it is that people have opened up in a very vulnerable way. So they've spoken a lot about their own mental health battles and their own anxieties. And when you hear someone like Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who you mentioned, or Lem Sissay, or Dame Kelly Holmes, or Emily Sandé, or Lily Allen, when you hear them talk about the moments in their lives when things went wrong, and you realise that they still made a success, and actually they learnt a lot from those periods of time in their life, it's a very liberating thing, and I think it makes us all feel a bit less alone.
Are there sort of like failures that people have spoken about that really kind of stuck with you?
There was a man who came on the podcast in season 4 called Mo Gaudat, who blew my mind in many ways. He was someone who had been very successful on paper, albeit not a household name. He was chief business officer at Google X.
Right.
And he had everything that he wanted on paper at a certain point in his life. He had a happy family life, flash cars in the garage, loads of money, and he wasn't happy. So he spent 12 years of his life developing an algorithm for happiness.
Right.
And he claims that he can make every single person happy. So the algorithm is essentially that if you live your life where your expectation of it is less than or equal to your perception of it, you can be happy.
Right.
And one of his failings was having failed to make the most of the time that he spent with his son, Ali, because his son, Ali, tragically died at the age of 21 during a routine operation. And in the aftermath of that traumatic tragedy, Mo was left reeling, and for weeks afterwards he would wake up and the first thing that he would think is, Ali died. He died.
Yeah.
And after a few weeks he decided to shift the thought pattern so that he still thought Ali died, but then he said to himself, yes, but he also lived. And I can be happy that he lived and that I had those memories with him.
Yeah.
And it was such a profound and beautiful thing to share. And I know that that has helped countless listeners.
Massively. How about you? What are your failures?
So I've actually been on the podcast. So the final episode of the first season, I was interviewed myself.
Right.
So I had to choose 3 failures. And it's interesting now, 2 years later, whether they'd be the same. But the 3 that I chose at the time were failure to have children. So that's one thing that I have conspicuously tried at and failed to do thus far, and that's caused me a great deal of pain. But I also want to talk openly about it because I believe that a lot of women feel shame and stigma attached to it, and they shouldn't. So I spoke about that. I spoke about my failure to say goodbye. I'm not great at goodbyes. And an ex-boyfriend of mine was killed before I had a chance to say goodbye. Oh, I'm really like, sorry, so depressed. I'm really depressing the audience. I'm sorry.
It's not depressing the slightest because it's people have gone through these things.
Yeah.
So that it's cathartic, isn't it?
Yeah, and then my third failure, because I thought I'd lighten it up a bit, was my failure at tennis.
Yeah.
But it is one of those sports that I love watching, and logically I couldn't conceive of a reason why I wouldn't be good at it.
Yes.
Because I can move my limbs, it seems relatively easy.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not. And people were always saying to me, oh, you look like a tennis player. I was like, okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I know, I don't know whether it's a compliment or not.
Do you have like a sort of a dream guest that you think, oh, I'd love to interview that person?
Michael Jordan would totally be up there because I watched The Last Dance like everyone else in lockdown. And was
Incredible, wasn't
obsessed.
it? Yeah.
So good. Michael Jordan would be amazing because he talks so openly about failure and about how he's only able to make those extraordinary shots that he makes because of the 9 times out of 10 that he's failed to make the shot and because of what he's learned about his technique from that.
Yeah.
So I would love him. And then I would settle, you know, Michelle Obama, but I'd settle for her husband. Either of the Obamas would be fine.
Yeah. OK, so you've also got a book out called Failosophy, and it's got the 7 principles of failure. What are those?
So the 7 principles of failure are, the first one is that failure just is, it's a fact, but you're in charge of the emotion that you attach to it.
Nice.
The second one is that you are not your worst thoughts.
Which I love.
Yeah, which I love too. It's hard to do, but you can genuinely train your brain to be more contented.
Yes.
Because generally speaking, your brain does what you tell it to. So if I tell my brain to raise my right arm, it will. And it's an exercise in realising that when your brain gets caught in that anxious narrative, which is telling you you're a failure, you've had an argument with your partner, they hate you, they don't love you anymore. It's an exercise in stopping your brain running away from itself and almost having a conversation with your brain and saying, listen, do you have objective evidence for that? Because if you don't, I'd like you to replace that negative thought with a positive one.
Is there one failure principle that is the best, that you think that's the one?
Yeah, one that I think is brilliant is failure is data acquisition.
OK.
So every time you fail at something, you're acquiring data for how not to fail next time around.
I like that.
And obviously there are different kinds of failures. Yeah, I'm talking about your common or garden failure, like failing an exam, failing a driving test. There are bigger existential failures like global pandemics that, you know, are less easy to categorise in this way. And a scientist, for instance, trying to come up with a vaccine for a global pandemic would not think that they themselves were a personal failure if an equation that they had put into practice didn't work.
Yeah.
They would think, well, that's necessary data, and I can exclude that from my inquiries and hopefully get closer to the thing that does work.
Yeah.
And I think you can apply that to many areas in life.
What's interesting is it's vitally important to fail and to learn from failure. And yet we sort of live at the moment in this strange world where you can't fail on Twitter. And if you failed 10 years ago, then we'll end you now.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think it's a real issue, and you're absolutely right. That at the precise moment that we're being encouraged to live our lives more publicly, we're also hamstrung by the fear of cancellation.
Yeah.
Because if you send out an ill-thought tweet one day, the next day it could go viral and you could lose your job. I mean, this has happened to many, like multiple people.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's an easy answer, to be honest. I just think that people need to be much more considered about what they put out there.
Yeah.
Because the key thing that you need to do is that you need to provide yourself with as safe a space as possible to take risks.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can never evolve and otherwise your life can never progress. And it breaks my heart because a lot of the people who listen to my podcast are in their 20s and they've grown up with this fear because they've grown up with social media.
Yeah.
And they're actively not pursuing promotions, not taking risks in their relationships, and they're stuck. They feel really stuck and fearful. And so all I can do from my position is to open up the conversation around it and say that it's okay and that most of us will hopefully live to see another day and try again tomorrow.
Absolutely. Do you ever sort of feel like it'd be interesting as well to have like sort of non-well-known guests?
Definitely. I have had quote-unquote non-famous people, not as many, and there's a really practical reason for that, which is that, you know, people listen to podcasts when they know the person, they know the name, and ultimately I want more people to listen so that more people can hear about how to tackle failure in their own lives.
Yeah.
And I do think that there is something really reassuring about knowing that those celebrities we see glitzy and glamorous on the red carpet have actually been through struggle. Like, it hasn't all been plain sailing. And there's something really necessary about that, I think, because we live in such a culture of curated perfection where it feels as though you're only as good as your last Instagram post and you need to look like a Kardashian to succeed. And I just want to attack and interrogate that notion.
Oh, that's a phenomenal answer. Well, talking of the world of celebrity, the other thing I find fascinating about you, you lived the lifestyle of Gwyneth Paltrow for a week.
I did.
Following the Goop guide.
Yes.
How was that? What did you get up to?
Oh my goodness. So I was living in Los Angeles at the time and I was commissioned by a newspaper to live life as Gwyneth for a week. And I have to tell you, it was extremely exhausting and extremely expensive.
Right.
And what I realised was you can only be Gwyneth Paltrow if you've got a lot of money and preferably kind of personal macrobiotic chef.
Yeah.
Because I spent my whole time just racing around to various like beauty appointments. And one of the things that I did is I had my vagina steamed.
Oh, did you?
So, yeah.
Wow.
As you can all probably tell.
Yeah.
That is one thing that Gwyneth credits with sort of hormonal balance and restoring her hormonal balance, all that sort of stuff. And all it involved was going into a kind of basement spa in Santa Monica, wearing a nylon robe and sitting over what was essentially a commode and having steam, like herbal steam, billowed up my nether regions.
Yeah.
And all it achieved for me was that I've just felt a bit clammy in an uncomfortable way.
Yeah.
And I didn't notice any difference other than when I walked out of the spa and I walked down the street towards the beach and a homeless man in a state of drunkenness wolf-whistled me. And I thought, well, maybe that's because I've got a nice, clean and freshly steamed vagina.
Yes.
But that's the only thing
But you can never know.
Exactly. That's the mystery of life.
Exactly. You can't turn to him and go, it's because my vagina's just been steamed, isn't it? What's next? What have you got planned?
I've got a gig at the London Palladium, which I'm super excited about, but also terrified, so you'll have to give me some tips.
Just clear eyes, full heart, can't lose.
I love that.
Just go out and, just own it, smash it, have fun. Is it socially distanced, or are you doing
Yes, so it is. So the London Palladium have all these incredible COVID-secure measures in place, and you can only book in groups of 2 or 4 in household bubbles. So it is totally socially distanced. And then after that, I've got a new novel coming out, and I'm in the process of adapting my earlier book for TV. So it's going to be like a fictionalised comedy version of my life.
Wow. So do you know who's going to be playing you?
No, it hasn't got to that stage yet.
Who would you like? Do you have somebody?
I feel like this sounds arrogant to say it because she's much younger than I am. But I love Daisy Edgar-Jones. I thought she was amazing in Normal People, and she's brunette.
Yes, she'd be ace.
Yeah.
She'd be good. I really enjoyed that. Ladies and gentlemen, the fantastic Elizabeth Day!